2022 has been an amazing year for me when it comes to riding new coasters. And since this year is now coming to a close, I thought now would be the perfect time to count down my top 25 coasters. Before we get into my number 25 pick, let's look at 5 coasters that just missed the mark. Coming in at number 25 is a ride that has barely moved in the past year, and that is Dominator, located at King's Dominion. The main thing I love about Dominator is it is just pure fun. Sure, it isn't the most crazy intense or creative layout, but it's just a joy to ride. Not to mention, it's still super smooth, even though it has been relocated before. Now, this is in no way the best B&M invert, but it does have some of the most insane elements B&M have ever devised, mainly that Cobra roll. While I don't love the fact that the mid-course brake crunch slows the train down to a crawl, it makes the second half feel a lot different from the first, and although it is still the best ride in the park, and I don't think it will be challenged by Pantheon. One thing that I love is that there is no wasted track on this twisted mess of steel. Sure, it isn't the most intense or impressive coaster, but for the height and space they had to work with, I believe they packed in a truly amazing layout. When in the back rows of the train, you get absolutely thrown over some of the small hills, and the inversions are really floaty and fun. Not to mention the breakneck pacing the ride holds from start to finish. Overall, it is just a fun and enjoyable ride experience that I look forward to getting back on soon. Coming in at number 22 is my favorite B&M invert, and that is Montu at Busch Gardens, Tampa. Now, I know this is a very widely agreed upon ranking, but you still can't argue with it because it's just true. While it isn't as intense as a ride like Alpengeist or Afterburn, what it lacks in breakneck power, it makes up for with length and it's the overall layout itself. This earned the title of my favorite B&M in the park and my favorite inverted coaster from them as well. Oh boy, I can feel the war brewing in the comments already. But my second favorite ride at Busch Gardens Tampa was in fact Cheetah Hunt. Now, I know some people will say that this is a family coaster, and while that is somewhat true, I don't mind because it's just pure fun to ride, and sometimes that's all you need in a coaster. I just had a blast with the ride, and I'm really sad I was only able to get a single ride while I was at the park. So it's more the reason to go back down to Florida. I truly believe this to be the most overlooked B&M looper in the world because most of will write this ride off as just another painful B&M stand-up coaster. But this could not be further from the truth. Once again, this is another pure fun ride that I just had a blast riding. And yes, it is nothing special when it comes to the layout, only having 2 inversions and not even over 3,000 feet of track. This easily took the title of my favorite looping coaster at Six Flags Over Georgia, and there was only one ride in the park that I thought was better, but we won't be seeing that ride until way later. Going from one of the smallest B&M loopers to one of the largest, we take a trip down to San Antonio for Superman Krypton coaster. While this is a very basic layout for this model of coaster, what shoots this into my top 25 is the interaction with the quarry. The coaster is situated right next to the quarry wall, which makes this just feel so much bigger than it is because of the way you effortlessly jump on and off of the wall. My one big gripe with the ride is the fact that it's very difficult to avoid headbanging during some of the inversions. But other than that, I love this coaster. Oh boy, this next one's going to be fun. Dropping even farther down my list from last year is the best coaster in the world. The only thing this ride has going for it is the airtime, because it lacks literally every other force that coasters normally pull. Even then, the airtime isn't even that great because most of it is just uncomfortable jolts and abrupt pops, which isn't a very pleasant experience. The only other part of this ride that is worth anything is the first two elements, and even those have been outdone by newer coasters. I know I sound like I'm crapping on this ride a lot, but it's just because so many people claim it to be the best in the world, when it is an objectively flawed ride. Even so, it's still in my top 25, so it's not a terrible coaster. Going from an overly praised ride to a coaster I had heard barely anything about prior to riding. We have Kraken, yet another B&M on the list, and this is my personal favorite of their floorless coasters, due to the more creative layout and the sheer intensity throughout. Every inversion whips you through it, pulling some crushing positive Gs. The most whippy of these inversions is either the final corkscrew or the 0G roll, each of which feel way too fast for the tightness of the element, but it is perfect for someone like me. Of course, the ride isn't the smoothest, but I don't care because of the perfection of the layout. Oh boy, another B&M. Is it obvious who my favorite manufacturer is? Wild Eagle at Dollywood is a ride that receives way too much hate for what it is, and that is an extremely fun and intense wing coaster. Not to mention the beautiful placement atop a mountain in the center of the park, making the whole ride feel huge from the pass below. When in the back row of the train, you get sustained floater airtime down the first drop, followed by up to 4 Gs in the valley and following loop. One quick word to the enthusiasts in the room. Being in rest restraints are not as bad as you make them out to be, and I'm sorry if you can't see that. By far the roughest coaster on the list is my number 15 spot, and that is Wonder Woman Golden Lasso Coaster. Overall, there was no dead moments during this 30 seconds you were on the ride, due to the absurd pacing. Plus, the airtime on this coaster is some of the most intense ejector airtime I've ever experienced. Mainly on the first drop, twisted hill, and drop off the elevated turnaround. My only problem is that the ride is so unbelievably jerky, which is weird for an RMC. There was one spot in particular that legitimately hurt, and that was the entrance into the corkscrew. I'm not even sure what caused it, but the whole train jerked back and forth, causing my head to smash into the back of the seat. Looking past that, it is a fun and fast coaster that is unbelievably intense. This is a coaster that needs to be talked about more because this is a ride that lives in the shadow of the other coasters in the park. When I wholeheartedly believe this is in the running for best in the park. I think this is one of the most well rounded coasters I've ever ridden, with its abundance of airtime, laterals, positives, and hang time. While the launches aren't the most intense when it comes to power, they aren't too distracting because of how amazing the rest of the ride really is. Each of the inversions offering some mix of laterals and hang time. And speaking of the hang time, that is the main feature of Copperhead, and it is fantastic. My favorite moments on the ride are the hang time on the first loop, Jojo roll, and cutback, as well as the numerous moments of intense ejector airtime. This is the first of two wooden coasters in my top 25, and it is Texas Stingray. Right off the bat, I want to say this ride is brutally underrated. The layout itself is near perfection when it comes to GCIs, and when I rode it, the coaster was running just as a wooden coaster should. That being, it had a slight bite to it, but it wasn't uncomfortable. This is one of the few coasters I can confidently say keeps getting better the longer it goes, due to the immaculate design of the layout, focusing on larger elements at the start before switching to lots more low to the ground twists and hops at the end. While the ride doesn't give any powerful ejector airtime, it does have some good pops into some of the turns and on some of the hills in the second half. The entire ride is just fun, fast, and intense. That is good for anyone from a well versed thrill seeker to a person who's just getting into coasters. The smallest coaster on the list is an absolute powerhouse, featuring some unbelievable ejector airtime. I was not expecting much going into this when I first rode it, but it really took me by surprise with how wacky the whole experience is. The fact that it is marketed as a family coaster just boggles me because I've been on a fair share of family coasters and none of them come close to the sheer intensity of Icebreaker. Not to mention, I've been on some thrill coasters that don't come close to the intensity of Icebreaker in terms of airtime. Other than that, the ride doesn't have much else to offer, but I was just so shocked by the layout, I can't not put this higher on my list. One thing I hate though is the trains, because they're so awful from a comfort perspective, but I still love the ride so I can ignore it. Just barely missing my top 10 is the original hypercoaster, Magnum XL 200. This ride is a beautiful mess of janky airtime, which is so much fun to be flung all over the place. I love the bouncy floater on the ride's outward leg that feels like the airtime on classic wooden coasters, such as Great American Scream Machine. But the best airtime on the ride is during the airtime alley, which is where the triangle airtime hills are. The shaping of the triangle hills are pretty self-explanatory because they're triangles, causing the riders to get absolutely shot into the stratosphere with some of the most intense ejector airtime on the entire planet. While I never got a chance to experience the magic seat, I did get some incredible rides on this absolute beast. The fact that this was the full first circuit coaster to break 200 feet is amazing due to the quality of the layout and forces for the time it was built. Yes, I know not many people would have this ride so high up, but I don't care, so shut up. Starting off the top 10, we have Mako, the world's most overrated B&M hyper. Now, I'm in no way saying that this is a bad ride, because it really can't be bad if it's in my overall top 10. My problem is that I went in expecting this to be the world's best B&M hyper, and what I ended up getting was an above average hyper with an amazing first half and a lackluster second half. Although, let's look at the good. The ride has some amazing airtime on mainly the first drop, first floater hill, and the speed hill. But other than that, it doesn't have many other moments of airtime. But also, the coaster is still glossy smooth, making it extremely re-rideable, which is good when you are me and use the coaster to dry off after Infinity Falls. The final full wooden coaster on my list is my favorite GCI, and that is Thunderhead. Yet another ride that took me by complete surprise, and man, am I glad that I didn't have any expectations going into this, because I was shook by the crazy pace the ride throws elements at you. Unlike Texas Stingray, this actually has some intense and sustained ejector airtime, as well as the quick pops into and out of turns. Only these are more intense for some reason. There are a few moments that legitimately scared me with how strong the airtime was, because I held my lap bar up so it didn't lower during the ride, and I was about as close to standing on a sit down coaster as you can get. I have heard some people describe the ride as rough or uncomfortable, but I honestly can't see it. Sure, it has a few potholes, but that's to be expected from this intense of a wooden coaster. Overall, this is just a fantastic ride. The best coaster at Cedar Point is up next, and that is Maverick. Now, let me explain. When people say that Steel Vengeance is their favorite coaster in the park, it's usually because of the airtime. But Maverick has more variety and power in its airtime, as well as every other force that Steel Vengeance is lacking. The positives are incredibly intense, especially in the low to the ground turns, and laterals are out of this world, mainly on the rapid transitions after the first drop, and on the insane stangle dives. Now, one thing that Maverick also has going for it is an absolutely incredible launch, which starts off the second half. Overall, I can't understand why someone couldn't see that Maverick is the best ride at Cedar Point, but it is. The world's best B&M hyper is at number 7, and that ride is Goliath. This coaster does everything that I wished Mako did, and even more, including actual ejector airtime. One of my favorite things that Goliath does that none of the other B&M hypers do is it completely embraces its high max speed and uses it to create some of the most memorable moments on any B&M hyper, including the 270 degrees downwards helix. Speaking of the helix, that is easily one of my favorite single elements on any coaster from B&M, due to the pulling of bone-crushing positive G's that just continue to get stronger and stronger the longer you are spiraling towards the ground, as well as a finale featuring small hills giving solid ejector airtime all the way until you come slamming to a stop on the brakes. This is easily the best B&M hyper, and there's nothing you can say that changed my mind. Steel Vengeance's smaller counterpart is so much better than it to the point it isn't even funny. This is Twisted Timbers located at King's Dominion. And right off the bat, I just want to say there's not a single dead spot on this coaster, which is really impressive for its size and length. The entire time you are either being tossed out of your seat or getting held upside down during one of the inversions. And unlike Steel Vengeance, Twisted Timbers doesn't rely on small and abrupt pops of airtime. Instead, it focuses on moderately sustained yet still powerful moments of ejector, as well as the absurd triple camelbacks. Unlike other RMCs, where all the inversions mostly feel the same, on this coaster each of the three inversions feel drastically different from each other. All around, this is a near perfect coaster and a near perfect layout for a coaster. Also, I love the little shimmy on the brake run. The last coaster at a Six Flags park is my number 5, and that ride is Iron Rattler. This is the most unique RMC hybrid, featuring lots of interaction with the quarry wall, jumping on, off, and even through the wall itself at one point. But don't worry, the layout is still fantastic, with numerous moments of intense ejector airtime, and even some unique sideways or even inverted floater airtime, going through the heaven roll and the smaller wave turns at the top of the quarry wall. Speaking of the supposed quarry qual that enthusiasts love to complain about, it is not slow in the slightest because it's still giving airtime and even laterals during that section. So I would say the ride has amazing overall pacing and is well one of the greatest first drops of all time. Just missing the top 3 is the most intense coaster I have ever ridden, and that is Intimidator 305. This is literally just Maverick, only 3 times as large and even more aggressive. I wish I could say more about the ride, but it is such a simple yet amazing coaster that I really don't know what else to say. But the ride gives some of the most intense lateral ejector airtime I've ever experienced, as well as this was the first and only time I have ever blacked out on a coaster. But I also did an 8 ride marathon on this coaster, and suffice to say, blacking out 8 times in a row is not good if you don't like terrible migraines. Not to mention, the ride is pretty comfortable due to the soft restraints and really smooth track work. This is my second favorite Giga Coaster, and I can't wait to re-ride this beast of steel. Kicking off the top 3 is the world's only launched hybrid coaster, Lightning Rod. While the ride itself didn't quite live up to my expectations, it still found its way into my top 3 favorite coasters by the end of my day at Dollywood. The ride wasn't quite as intense as people made it out to be, but it still had some fun, fast, and forceful airtime. Although the ride did have some moments that were brutally rough with numerous potholes throughout. The launch itself is deceptively powerful for the speed it hits due to the steep angle of the launch. Now, I said that the ride didn't live up to the hype, but one element that really did was the quadruple down. I'm not usually into quick pops of airtime, but there was just something about these hills that just did it for me. And I really think it had to do was the fact that it wasn't uncomfortable with the way that it bounced you around. Overall, this was my favorite ride I did while at Dollywood and my favorite overall launched coaster. My favorite coaster built by B&M is Fury 325 at my home park of Carowinds. This ride is absolute perfection from start to finish with not a foot of wasted track. The entire coaster is closer to an Intamin rather than a B&M due to the quick transitions and strong pops of airtime in almost every single element, along with super sustained airtime down the perfectly shaped first drop that feels like it lasts forever. Also, the ride warms up so much Though whenever it's been running for a while, it starts to feel way too fast to the point where you get lateral ejector airtime on the treble clef turnaround. The whole ride is just beautifully designed to fit on its plot of land and also to have the greatest layout B&M have ever come up with. Only dull part of the ride has the single most terrifying head chopper of all time. But this is not enough to beat out my number one coaster, and that is Iron Gwazi is to no surprise my number one coaster. I believe this is the world's greatest coaster, and I have an entire review going into a deep dive of the whole ride experience, so go check that out if you're interested. Just to talk about the major things I love, this is the best paced RMC by a long shot, and it also has the best sections of any RMC, including the amazing outer bank turn, death roll, and outward banked wave turn. The ride's first drop is also an incredible standout moment with its beyond vertical drop angle giving extreme ejector airtime. Overall, this is the greatest coaster I have ever ridden, and it's not even close. That wraps up my list. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more roller coaster content. If you want to leave a hate-filled comment on how I'm wrong about a certain coaster, please feel free to. But for you normal people who won't attack me for my opinion, I would love to hear your top coasters. I read every comment and I will even respond to as many as I can. Well, that's all I have for this video, so I'll see you in 2023. Bye for now.